Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever in the world you are. Welcome to this program. Tonight, we'd like to discuss a statement issued by South Africa Secretary General, ANC Secretary General. Just give me a minute. That's the full statement on your screens, ladies and gentlemen. I'll read it out, then we can discuss it. Moments after being announced as incoming Secretary General of the ruling African National Congress, ANC, Fikile Mbalula said his party would intensify assisting neighbouring Zimbabwe to recover from decades of economic downturn and massive brain, uh, brain drain. We must be very much concerned about what is happening in Zimbabwe and what role we need to play. We do not subscribe to the idea of regime change in Zimbabwe. We need to campaign very hard to get things right because Zimbabweans are coming to our country in their numbers. Balula spoke to journalists in Johannesburg in his briefing in his new capacity. Something is not right in their own country, and we must support them. Once that country becomes what it was, there will be no Zimbabweans here. So the British must think very hard about what they have done, and the Americans. They must uplift the sanctions so that Zimbabwe can grow. Balula said the Western nations should not use sanctions to deepen the pain and suffering in Zimbabwe. There we have it. We have got Benjamin to help us discuss this issue. Benjamin, greet the audience and what do you
Thank
think?
you. Thank you very much, and good evening, good morning, viewers, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. It's it's a very interesting statement, or it's a very, let's say, interesting point of view that our one of our leaders, most respected leaders, would air such a view. So first of all, uh, from a layman's point of view, let us find out what regime change is. So basically, regime change is the replacement of a government by another, or replacement of, yeah, a government by another, like change of leadership, basically, right? So, in other words, what uh, Mr. Mbalula is saying, that he does not support change of government. In other words, he's saying the government that is ruling Zimbabwe is the one that it should continue from now until whenever. So very interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think in this particular case, uh, my interpretation of that statement is that ANC subscribes to the same notion as ZANU PF does. ZANU PF regards anything that will lead to ZANU-PF losing the elections as a regime change agenda. This is why ZANU-PF has resisted all pressure to have free, fair, and credible elections. Because that's what they are. That's what free and fair and credible elections are all about. What's the point of having an election and you are told you can only uh, uh, elect the same people who are there? There would not be regime change. Ultimately, free, fair, and credible elections is about changing, being able to change. Yes, you can say you can pick the individuals in the party and say, no, we don't want these ones. These are still good ones. But you can also, at the end of the day, change the regime. That's the ultimate goal of free, fair, and credible elections. There are no limits. The legitimacy of the government should be based on the free democratic will of the electorate. And you cannot start limiting it and saying you've got free and fair elections, but they cannot remove the government of the day. ZANU PF should still continue to rule. So, what ANC are saying here is that they subscribe to the same notion that there will be no regime change. And I find that particularly interesting or outrageous, considering that South Africa itself has held elections since 1994, which, by all accounts, including the opposition, all the opposition in South Africa itself, have said were free, fair, and credible. In other words, ANC has ruled South Africa since the country's independence in 1994 based on the free will, democratic will of the people of South Africa. So for the same government, the ANC government, to now say they do not subscribe to regime change in Zimbabwe, it's ridiculous. In other words, they are saying Zimbabweans cannot have the same rights as enjoyed by South Africans, where the South African people can remove ANC if they so wish, but they cannot remove ZANU-PF. And South Africa, ANC is subscribing to the same notion. That is what I find really outrageous in this case.
Yes, that's very true. I actually support that notion to actually say that the ANC is saying that Zimbabwe is incapable of actually having democracy, or they are trying to take away democracy from us by insisting or saying that there should not be any regime change in a country. So uh, then it seems as if we're just for Zimbabwe's sake, they they push away the word democracy. It should be just, you know, one government until, that's basically what they are saying, of which I find it very absurd to for a country that is actually an example of democracy in Africa. Why would they not want Zimbabweans to enjoy what they are enjoying as well? So it's
Well,
very discouraging.
we can also talk about it in practical terms. Zimbabwe has held elections since 1980. Let's talk about the most recent elections: 2013, 2018, and then this coming elections in 2023. In 2018, the elections were not free, fair, and credible. And of all countries, South Africa would know that because they know which is the the GNU had failed to implement any meaningful democratic reforms then. And therefore, then the elections that followed could not be free, fair, and credible. And yet, South Africa, including all the other SADC countries, endorsed those elections as being free, fair, and credible. The most recent ones, 2018, President Ramaphosa himself was the one who said the elections went well. And yet they were blatantly rigged. There's no question about it. That we had no verified voters roll. There was no free press. People were coerced to vote for ZANU-PF. And yet South Africa was prepared to overlook all that and endorse those elections. And by virtue of endorsing those elections as free, substantially free, fair, and credible, they gave ZANU-PF legitimacy. That is the regime change that South Africa has been uh, um, talking about here, that they will not tolerate regime change. So they are prepared to endorse rigged elections just to frustrate, to stop regime change. That is exactly what ZANU-PF wants them to do, and they are doing it. I think that is the bottom line that we have got to accept here. We 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 can go to on to and listen to the views of a South African as well on this video.
Mr. Mbeki, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. I mean, you've been watching throughout the entire morning. Let's start with this particular case, Lux and Trantla. I mean, what is this a symptom of? I mean, on the one hand, you have people scrambling for jobs and pointing in one direction to illegal foreigners. You have the issue of drugs emerging there. And I must tell you, some very impressive support around Lux Dlamini. What's your take on that matter, Mr. Mbeki?
The ANC government collaborated with ZANU-PF in destroying effectively the economy of Zimbabwe because they both did not want an opposition party formed by civil society to take power in Zimbabwe. So these three actions came together. The Zimbabwe, by destroying the economy, ZANU-PF, by destroying the economy of Zimbabwe, a huge flood of people flooded into South Africa looking for jobs. And by not controlling the border and effectively allowing the border not to be controlled, then it was easy for this flood. And now the consequence of this is that poor people from Zimbabwe flooded into poor areas in South Africa, which are the townships and the informal settlements. And this is the outcome of what you get there.
Benjamin, do you have any comments on that one?
Yes. What Mr. Mbeki has said couldn't be far from the truth. I think it's very accurate, and those that stay in both the countries, Zimbabwe and South Africa, respectively, I think they share the same sentiment, because this is what is exactly happening in both countries, where you find everyone in Zimbabwe who is still able-bodied is migrating to South Africa, both legally and illegally. So it's pretty true. And I think with what Mr. Mbalula has just said, it is he actually made it very visible and clear for everybody that would want to use their heads to think. This is exactly what Mr. Mbeki is saying, and what Mr. Mbalula is supporting, basically, to say we will not have any regime change in Zimbabwe. We will just support the same government, right? That is that is basically, that is causing all the problems. So basically, let's say all the problems that South Africa is facing is because of the the ZANU-PF government, and what the ZANU-PF government is facing is basically what the South African government is facing, basically.
There, I totally agree with you. I think the whole point of a democracy is that people should have the opportunity to say, you have failed, we want somebody else. In Zimbabwe, what we have had these last 42 years is a situation where ZANU-PF has failed. People realize ZANU-PF is corrupt, incompetent, uh, and, 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 and tyrannical, but they've not been able to remove it from office. This is at the heart of the problem. And what is unacceptable here also is a situation where South Africa itself, they gained their independence in 1994. They have also realized the problems that could result from such threats as corruption. They have removed former President Jacob Zuma because they accused him of being corrupt. That is what democracy is all about. And yet, the funny part of it is South Africa, the same ANC government, is now vowing and saying, we will not accept the removal of ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe. So I totally agree with what the gentleman there, Mbeke, was saying, that ANC have worked together with ZANU-PF to retain ZANU-PF in power against the democratic will of the people of Zimbabwe. And by retaining ZANU-PF in power, the consequences are corruption has become rampant, mismanagement has become worse and worse. And those are the two cancers that have killed the Zimbabwe economy. And as ZANU-PF desperately hangs on to power, it has become more and more tyrannical. The people who have flooded to South Africa are either economic refugees or political refugees or both. So the gentleman is absolutely right that South Africa ANC government, by adapting this, maintaining this position that they will not accept regime change in Zimbabwe, they have per se accepted that corruption, mismanagement, and tyranny should be the order of the day in Zimbabwe. They will not allow that to change.
And
I think we need to explore there, Benjamin, what is it that they would benefit from retaining ZANU-PF in government? How does the ANC benefit from making sure that ZANU-PF remains in power?
okay, thank you very much. So it's 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 you're right to say what are the benefits and what are the disadvantages of this. But for them, it's always, let's look at the benefits, because I just I just want to clarify his standpoint, Mr. Mbalula's standpoint, that he believes that ZANU-PF has been made a scapegoat, right? He thinks that everything that is happening in Zimbabwe, it is not this regime fault, basically. They have been made a scapegoat by what they term the powers that be, which is the United States of America and Britain. But that is another case. So let's go to the benefits. What are the benefits that ANC stand to get with, let's say, with a weak Zimbabwe, because this is the situation that is there. A weak Zimbabwe, economically, politically, right? So let's start with economical, right? We know there's a lot of uh, migrants that are actually moving into South Africa, both legally and illegally, and these are providing cheap labor. Zimbabweans are working there basically just to put food on the table, right? And this is beneficial because you know they can they can, I mean, when somebody's working for very little, you know, you don't have to lose a lot of money with them having to take some of the money and send it to their people back home. So it's actually easier or cheaper to employ a Zimbabwe than to employ a South African in South Africa. So this is where you find that the Mr. He had mentioned a name of another uh, comrade that is giving Zimbabweans a hard time there to say go back to your country. I forgot his name, but I'm sure he is the one that is in charge of this operation called Operation Vidula, where they are violently uh, destroying Zimbabweans, whether it be little taverns or little, you know, kiosks to sell their wares, to say you guys go, and it's actually happening where these people are getting killed. So it's from an economic standpoint, they are benefiting, but it's just the benefit of the top minority. The poor South Africans, they're losing their jobs for it. I don't know what is
Well,
your take.
I think on the economy, although that point, let's just say the jury is still out. I personally would argue that South Africa would have done economically would have prospered even more if Zimbabwe had remained economically viable and prosperous, because it will have a neighbor to whom they can sell their produce. And also the other point that you mentioned there, the social problem that you have had so many very poor Zimbabweans going to South Africa, and that has caused a lot of uh, disruption, social disruption in that country. So I think the jury is out. But personally, I was going to ask you the political, what is it that ANC stands to gain politically by keeping ZANU-PF in power?
Okay, so politically, we are looking at you rub my back and I will rub your back. We got each other's back, because if you look back in when South Africa needed help from Zimbabwe during the apartheid, it was Zimbabwe that also sent some of their people to go and uh, help, but it was not ZANU PF that sent people, Zimbabweans to go and help them fight their battle. It was Zimbabwe. ZANU PF has got no army. ZANU PF has, it is Zimbabweans that went and fought to liberate their brothers. Right. So right now, why are they supporting this same one regime? They call it, that they're not willing to change, is because, first of all, these two parties are, or the term they say is, they are the liberators of the country, right? ANC was the party that is termed to have liberated South Africa into what it is, the rainbow nation today. And ZANU-PF is also termed to be the liberation party, right? So by virtue of a liberation party losing elections, right? And this is not only just in these two countries; it's across most African countries, right? So by one virtually losing their position or their grasp to power, would actually open doors to democracy. So ANC does not want that day because it will open eyes to all other African countries that there is more life, or there's life after these liberation movements. It's so they fear, there is that fear of losing the grasp of power. I think this is what their main fear is, and this is why they will help ZANU-PF to maintain a tight hold on the people of Zimbabwe.
I agree with you. I think for ANC, they consider themselves to be the part of liberation in South Africa, and therefore then supporting ZANU-PF will entrench this idea that the part of liberation should be the one that rules the country. So they fear from that point of view. But if you look at leaders like Nelson Mandela, if he was alive today, I do not think that he would have ever endorsed South Africa ANC's position, i.e., uh, backing and propping up a tyrannical uh, regime in Zimbabwe, just for the sake of they are the Liberation Party and we are the Liberation Party in South Africa. Because otherwise, if that is what uh, Nelson Mandela wanted, he would have never supported a democratic South Africa, because he must have known that by making South Africa a healthy and functioning democracy, you will be undermining ANC's position as of chances of retaining power indefinitely, at least for the same period as the NOPF has done already, over 42 years now and counting. So, so I think that is also an issue that should be looked at. The ANC of Nelson Mandela, I do not think will ever endorse what the ANC has been doing these last 10 years or so. I don't think he would have ever done that. He was a Democrat. He believed in a democratic South Africa. And why would you not want Zimbabwe to be a healthy and functioning democracy? So I think this has got to be looked at in that light. That what we have got in South Africa right now, ever since the demise, uh, Nelson Mandela stepped down, is the kind of uh, ANC that is really maybe this the copy of the Zimbabwe, the mentality of the ANC since Mandela stepped down has not been far-fetched from the same mentality that we have in ZANU-PF. If these guys were in power at the beginning in 1994, I think we'll be talking of a totally different South Africa right now. That is what we are looking at. Before we move on to another, before we close, I thought we could comment on what our friend Themba Mliswa said.
Okay, so reading from what Mr. Themba Mliswa says in regards to the sentiment that Mr. Mbalula says, while I will read and it says as follows: while his sentiments have sent ZANU-PF supporters into overdrive, outspoken Mliswa attacked the euphoric Mbalula, saying Africa cannot dictate choices for Zimbabwe. Right. there is so much excitement locally. Oh, sorry, I'll skip this. It says regime change is to preserve. Regime change is a preserve of Zimbabweans to effect or not to. How does South Africa predetermine what choices Zimbabweans can and cannot make? For whose benefit and to what end shouldn't regime change be effected? This is a lame and populist utterance by an excitable person. And I found these words very, very true, and I agree with him completely.
I too agree with him. I think Deepen Mbalula has got his finger, he's hitting the nail on the head. What I find ironic about Themba Mliswa is that he is there talking about it should be Zimbabwean, the people of Zimbabwe alone who decides whether there is going to be regime change or not. And that is as it should be. But to those who do not know who Themba Mliswa is, he was a senior ZANU PF a leader until the last elections when he fell out of favor and became independent. So if I had the opportunity to interview Themba Mliswa, what I would ask him is, has ZANU PF been running free, fair, and credible elections all along? When he was a member of ZANU PF, was ZANU PF holding free, fair, and credible elections? And even these elections that he's participating, he participated in 2018, for instance, and won the seat for Norton. Were those elections free, fair, and credible? Was that the true will of the true democratic will of the people of Zimbabwe? Because until we address those points, some of these opposition politicians become opportunists. He is condemning it now because he fell out with ZANU PF. And yet he is maintaining the status quo by participating in these flawed elections, because he also knows that ZANU PF is giving away a few seats to the independents to entice them to participate. The present situation, the present arrangement in Zimbabwe, political arrangement, is such that ZANU PF will rig to secure majority and the presidency, and then will allow the opposition to win a few more seats so that it gives the impression that Zimbabwe is a healthy, functioning democracy. And people like him will, Tendai BT and a few others, will always win those few seats and they are content. And then they go into parliament and make a lot of noise as if to say Zimbabwe is a healthy, functioning democracy. It is not. I think they are as hypocritical as our South African friends. Over to you, Benji.
Yes, that's very true. I do support him for at least coming out and trying to defend democracy, even though he himself is participates in something that we all believe that is not democrat at all. It is not the will of the people. But however, it is quite shameful, for somebody as Mr. Mbalula and South Africa, ANC, to stand and actually, in other words, deny Zimbabwe of their democratic right to a credible, free, and fair election. It is it is appalling, to say the least, to say that they cannot support a change of government. a government does not just come uh, without the will of the people. If what they should have done was we would defend the will of the people of Zimbabwe. This is what is solidarity, and they always use that word, but unfortunately, from this instant, they are far, far, far away from it. It's very sad, and I hope that he could retract his statement or try to explain what he meant when he says he will not support the will of the people of Zimbabwe. And yet, these are the same people that are basically brutalizing and burning and doing all xenophobic attacks on the people of Zimbabwe. And yet, they know the problem that Zimbabweans are facing. They may say it is economic sanctions, but to what extent? What is the real problem? Which is very, very sad. But at least there are people out there, and I hope there are people that are listening to this and will also, learn from it that sometimes as Zimbabweans we need to do things ourselves. We need to fix our own destiny. How do we do it? The only way to do it is to go through the reform, democratic reforms that are needed for us to have a clean, clear, and fair playing ground. So that when we go to election, there is all the freedom that people should enjoy. A verified voters roll, for example, that people should enjoy. And yet Mr. Mbalula is saying he doesn't care about that. Basically he doesn't care. As long as it's the same government that is there, we will support it. That is not right. That is not right, especially when the people of Zimbabwe are also crying for help from our neighboring countries, whom we should not forget we assisted them in their time of need. So it's very, very unfortunate.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. And with that, I will call it a night.
Thank you very
Thanks
much for
again.
having me. Good evening, viewers. Thank you
Good
for
evening.
joining us.
Good evening.